Hey folks, welcome to the channel. Today we are going to create an analog clock. I wanted to do this as soon as I finished with the digital clock project. This project leverages the context object of browser, allows us to draw simple to complex drawings on the HTML canvas. In later videos, when we will work on expert level projects, I will create a tutorial video to explain context in simple steps. Enough talk. Let's head to coding. As usual, let's start by creating the project folder. Let's add the HTML file with boilerplate code in it. Let's add the reference to our CSS and JavaScript files respectively. Let's add our canvas element where our clock will render. Now, let's quickly move to the CSS file and add styles for body and canvas. Now we will head over to our JavaScript file. Let's create a reference for our canvas element by using getElementById method. Next, we will define the context type, which is in our case 2D. To draw the clock, we will define a radius, which will be half of canvas height. We will be using the radius as our clock dial or face is round. We will use the translate method to map the origin or the position on the canvas. Now let's reduce the radius by 10%. Next, let's define a method called drawClock inside this. Let's create a white circle on canvas with updated radius using arc method of canvas. Let's see this code in action by switching to our browser. Great. Now the circle renders perfectly. Let's go ahead and start further coding. Let me set the windows so that we can see side by side how the canvas is getting rendered. Let's go back to our JavaScript file and continue coding. Now let's create an inner dial by using the property called create radial gradient. Let's code that. Let's create a function called drawFace with parameter context and radius. Let's define a variable called gradient, and we will cut this code from drawClock and we will put it inside drawFace. let's create a radial gradient which we will be using to create the rim A radial gradient is defined by the two imaginary circles, a starting circle and an ending circle, in which the gradient starts with the start circle and it moves towards the end circle. Let's add that to our clock to give our clock a black boundary. Let's provide the parameter to create radial gradient function. We want to create a rim around the circle of the clock. So for that, we are going to put the rim radius between 95% of the radius to 105% of the radius. Let's add the color variant. That means how the gradient would start, how it will proceed, and how it will end with the color. So our gradient is very simple. It is going to start with gray, that is a 333 hash. Then it will transfer towards white, and then again it will be gray. Let's use this gradient color in our stroke style. Let's give some width to the gradient. Let's call this draw phase from draw clock. Let's provide the context and the radius to our function. Now we can see there is a smooth gradient which is looking like an outer boundary of our dial. This is what we wanted to achieve. Also, I have drawn an arc which is the center circle which is going to work as a resting place for all the hands, that is for minutes, hours, and seconds. So let's go ahead and start adding the numbers to the dial, and then we will add the hands to the dial. Let's create another function called draw numbers. With the context and radius as the parameters. Let's define two variables called angle and number. Let's set the font, text baseline, and text alignment to the context. Let's create a for each loop which starts with 1 and ends at 12 so that we will be able to draw the numbers on the face of the clock. Let's add the code to add the number in the dial. Each number in the dial will be separated by 30 degrees. So here we will calculate the degrees by dividing pi by 6, which will give us 30 degrees, and we will be multiplying that with each number to get the corresponding degree. For example, 1 will be associated at 30 degrees from 12, whereas 3 will be pi will be 3 times of 30 degrees, that is 90 degrees from 12. Let's call this method draw numbers to see if we are able to draw the numbers on the face of the clock or not. Great. Now let's go ahead and start coding for the hands of the clock. Let's create another function called drawTime where we will be calculating the number of hours, minutes, and seconds, and based on that we will be drawing the hands of the clock. Let's use JavaScript's date function to get the date object. Now we'll extract the hours, minutes, and second from this date object. Now since JavaScript date object is going to give you hours in 24 hours format, so we have to make sure now JavaScript date object is going to give you the number of hours in 24 hours format. We are going to divide the hours by 12 and we are going to use the remainder which we are going to get. In this way, if we are getting, let's say, 20 as hours, if we divide it by 12, we'll be getting remainder as 8. So that means in digital format, it will be 8 o'clock. Now let's calculate the angle for the hours hand. To calculate the angle, we'll be multiplying hour by 30 degrees because for every 1 hour, the hour's hand will move 30 degrees. Dividing the pi by 6 will give us 30 degrees because pi's value is 180 degrees, and by dividing it by 6 we'll be getting 30 degrees. So this will be for hours. Now we need to make sure that hours hand moves when there is activity of minutes hand as well as seconds hand. So let's calculate those precisions as well. Now in 60 minutes, the hour's hand moves 30 degrees. So to calculate how much it will move in 1 minute, we divide the minute by 60. And similarly for second, we will be dividing that by 60 into 60, that is 3600. Adding all these will give us the hours degree. Let's do the same thing for minutes and seconds as well. Now seconds hand move 1 degree for every second. So if we divide 180 degree by 30, we'll be getting 1 degree. So that's what we are trying to achieve here. Now let's define a draw hand function which will be drawing the hands on our clock. It will take parameters as context, position, length, and width, whereas position will be where the hand will be drawn, length will be the length of the hand, and width will be the width of the hand, and context is the canvas. Let's call our draw hand method for hour, minute, and second so that we can render all the 3 hands on the clock. Our hand will be small, so we are going to pass the length as half of the radius, and the width will be 7%. And the width will be 7% of radius. Similar thing we are going to do for similar thing we are going to do for the minutes hand as well, only in that case the length of the minutes hand will be 80% of the radius, and in seconds hand we'll be doing the 90%. In seconds hand, we'll be doing the 90% of the radius as length, but the width of the seconds hand will be only 2%. Let's call the draw time method after the draw numbers method. As we can see now, all 3 hands are rendering perfectly. So what we need to do is we need to call this draw clock method every second. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll be using the set interval method we'll be using the inbuilt method of set interval from JavaScript to call the draw clock method every second. Since we already have a function, we're just going to call it inside that. Let's remove our manual call to the function. Our clock is working perfectly and I'm able to see the clock's hands are moving correctly with my local time. So that's it for this project. It was a fun project to create and a lot of math was included. I hope you guys liked this project. If you liked, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and I'll come with more awesome videos.